Hello, everyone. My name is Brad Whitworth. I'm your substitute host for this edition of Circle of Fellows, which is a gathering of IABC Fellows. They'll be introducing themselves in just a second. I'm taking the place of Shell Holtz, who actually is on assignment today, has another gig going on. So we are missing him, his regular role as moderator. But I do have a wonderful group with me today to talk about the topic that is featured in this edition of Communication World, IABC's journal online. The topic is multi-generational communication, multisyllabic here, multi-generational communication in the workplace. And we want to talk about what it means, what the challenges are, and how as communications professionals we can meet some of the issues of the day and time that we live in, where we have more than ever more generations in the workplace collaborating, working together, trying to accomplish goals for their organizations, and the challenges that present. So I'll let people introduce themselves, give a little bit of background, and I'll start with the person at the left of my little ribbon screen, Ms. Brenda Siler. Brenda?
Hello, everybody. Happy to be with you. I'm Brenda Siler. I am in the Washington, D.C. area in Silver Spring, Maryland. I am a part of this, I think, because of my 2 stints that I did with AARP. But I also do communications consulting with a number of national associations and nonprofits that happen to be headquartered here in Washington, D.C. So happy to be a part of the panel today.
And next to Brenda in my ribbon is Mark Schumann. So,
good morning.
Mr. Schumann, how are you?
Hey there. It's good to see everybody. My name is Mark Schumann. I'm calling today from Ridgefield, Connecticut. And I experience multiple generations every day in the classroom as the Director of Communication Studies at the Zicklin College of Business at Baruch College in New York City. And look forward to today's conversation.
And next to Mark is Tamra Gillis, coming to us from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Brad. I am Tamra Gillis, and I am calling in from central Pennsylvania, Elizabethtown. And I imagine I've been called to this austere meeting because I'm, like Mark, I'm teaching students, our next generation of great communicators. And one of the challenges that we are trying to address in our organizational communications is how we keep the 5 generations of people engaged and on point with our corporate values and outcomes.
And last, certainly not least, as we work our way west across the country, Ann McCauley, coming to us from the great state of Nevada.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning. Yeah, we've got pretty strong East Coast contingency with us, don't we, Fred? But that's good. That's good. That's what this organization is all about. I wear a couple of hats, and one is as a longtime communication consultant, but the other hat is I'm executive director of the Washoe County Medical Society, which is a professional association for physicians and physician assistants. And a big piece of that is working with the medical school. So I'm interacting with first-year med students and retired physicians. So I've got the whole gamut of folks in my portfolio these days. And one of our challenges is how do we get those young people involved in an organization that's 150 years old? So it's interesting.
So that really talks about the range of people that we are exploring today in terms of audiences. The workplace today has traditionalists, boomers, the Gen Xers, millennials, the Gen Zers, all trying to get things done as sort of a cohesive workforce. And we've always had, I guess the question I would pose to the group to start out with is we've always had older people and younger people in the workforce. What's different about today's environment that we're paying more attention? We have bigger definitions of all these different cuts. Why is it different now than it was when perhaps any one of us was entering the workforce?
Could I step forward and start going? I think in my research and in my teaching with my students in organizational communications, the big factor is technology, and how technology has had an impact on everything we do in organizations. When you consider 20, maybe 30 years ago, the computer was a device that not everyone had their hands on. We didn't use it for every type of communication within the organization. It was really a specialized workforce that had that knowledge, and typically they were at the top of the hierarchy, the food chain, if you will. And as we think about Moore's Law, and technology has become ubiquitous within our society and our organizations, it hasn't become the great equalizer. Oftentimes it's the great divider. If people do not take the time or have not been given the opportunity to learn how to use it and how to make it an integral component of the organization.
I'd like to add to that and push back just a little bit and then agree enthusiastically. I think certainly technology does bring to the surface many differences between generations, but I think we have to look beyond technology to look at a fundamental shift in the relationships that people have with institutions, the expectations people carry about institutions, and in turn, the disappointment people can feel from institutions. To me, I think that is a much bigger opportunity for divide than the technology people may use to express those concerns. There's just a fundamental difference between someone my age and my experience with institutions over the years and people of younger generations. They have seen institutions let down their parents. They've seen institutions let down their friends. They've seen institutions let down themselves. And they enter relationships with organizations with a much higher degree of skepticism and suspicion about what the motives of the organization truly are than we did. And to me, as expressed through technology, that's the big change.
And I think, Mark, I think you're on target, because I think it's a different in the cultural change. And when you and I first went to work, you worked 8 to 5, 9 to 5, whatever, and you did what you were told. And today's business model isn't like that anymore. We've got a level of flexibility and a level of expectation that we never had in the past. And I think it's tremendous. And it can divide us if there's people who are stuck in that old model and wonder why these young people are being so crabby and bossy about what they want. But I look at it and say, gee, when I was of that age, wouldn't it have been great if I could have had that flexibility? How would my career be different?
Yeah.
And I'd like to add to that too. I think some of it, what we're seeing, yes, is attributed to technology and a younger generation. But I will say that when I moved back to my home, the DC area, 23 years ago, I saw it then with what we might consider people who are now older Gen Xers. I was shocked at one of the jobs, my first job I had, where my younger colleagues, Gen Xers, would leave the job in 6 months and go to another job, and leave that job in 6 months and go to another job. They were willing to put their shingle out. I'm available. I've got these degrees. I've got this experience, and go and sell themselves basically to the highest bidder. So it's not anything really that new. Yes, there is a traditional approach that I think boomers have with staying in the job for 30 years and getting that gold watch kind of mentality. But even then, with that, boomers are being sent out earlier than they anticipated they would be, because the business model seems to be turning more towards contractual work, short-term work, in order to avoid paying the benefits. That's what a lot of companies are doing. And a lot of boomers who have been in their job for 20, 25 years are shocked to be out in the job market. So that's another aspect that we are being hit with and have been hit with now for more than a decade.
I think we'll put in the caveat at the front end of things that we don't want to generalize too much, and we sometimes will slip into stereotyping, and that while we might think of, oh, the traditionalists / boomers or the geezers, I will also say that there are a lot of young geezers too, and sometimes the adoption of technology, the generational thing, is not necessarily related to age. So we'll put that sort of out there in the front end of things. However, there are studies that are done. We do have sort of personas that we track, and we know a little bit more through demographic and psychographics about the kinds of people who are in the workforce today. And we do have this very, very high range. I think some of what you just said is true. I mean, when you read some of the articles, Jeannie Meister in her piece in Communication World talked about this turning point in that first quarter of 2015, just 2 years ago, that millennials became the largest generational cohort in the workplace. And by 2025, millennials plus Generation Z are going to be 60% of the workforce. And this is happening at a time when we're also seeing people retiring at older ages, with 80 being the new 60. So I think we do have some challenges to deal with. One of the things I will also say before I sort of pose it back to you guys is, if you do have a question for the group, please post it in Twitter. We're monitoring that. The hashtag is hashtag COF, Circle of Friends 25, Circle of 25, episode 25 here, Circle of Friends. So hashtag COF 25 if you got a question. But how are we coping with this broader range and a different set of workplace expectations?
Well, one of the things that I hear from certainly my students, and my students are not communicators, they are business students, but I also hear in the organizations where I step in and help, there is such a hunger for personal relationships, a hunger for a relationship with, if it's a traditional supervisor, certainly an informal mentor, certainly colleagues around the world, and the degree to which people use technology to facilitate relationships that has a real impact on how sticky the culture can be. Because the real result of all of this change is that cultures have become much less sticky. And it is much easier for people to glide in and glide out without ever having really touched or been touched by an experience. Those are the conditions that as communicators we have to be sensitive to, is that it is too easy to slip in and out and work without being a part of an experience. And we have always relied on the organizational experience to help facilitate what we needed to communicate.
I think that this points to, for communicators, our part in the organizational employee relationship and the psychological as well as concrete contract that organizations make with employees. Oftentimes employees come in with a, for lack of a better term, romanticized vision of what that relationship is going to be like based on other experiences, society at large. What they've been fed is the traditional relationship. And when that doesn't exist, going back to Mark's point, we see some cultural divides, and we see a lack of organizational identification, right? People come in, they work, they leave. They don't have that relationship with the organization where they feel like, I am proud to be identified as part of this organization. This is, it's, that extended family metaphor. Yeah. And that's unfortunate, because that's where engagement and loyalty find their roots. And going back to Brenda's point, if we don't have engagement and loyalty with our employees, they are going to put out their shingle and try and find the next best opportunity and move on. And we lose a lot of great talent and organizational knowledge when that happens.
I find that companies are not teaching their people managers how to communicate with their staff. I have noticed in the past 10 to 15 years the lack of investment that is being placed in professional development inside of companies. And I'm talking about supervisory skills. As the landscape in our workplace changes, to supervising and managing staff is required. So human resources is not investing in training their individuals who are now all of a sudden people managers. There's not a career track to lead you to that. And I think that's where the communication breakdown does occur. And there is an opportunity for communicators to collaborate with HR staff in developing those types of training activities for people managers. But if the company has made deliberate cutback in training their staff to be supervisors in today's age, you're going to have the turnover. You're going to have frustration on the part of the supervisor. You're going to have frustration on the part of those people who are being supervised, and they are all going to exit.
I think we have to look at ourselves as well. And I think that there are times as committed as we are to the quality and the advancement of our work, that we get caught up with shiny objects, and the latest tool becomes the latest shiny object, and we're guilty, and we've been guilty for generations of the latest shiny object being the answer to all of our needs. Brad and I sitting having coffee in 1984 saying, it's all about desktop publishing. That will change the world. And so we're still chasing shiny objects. And I think sometimes we as communicators have to look beyond what is the latest toy or what is the latest tool, but what is the heart, back to Tamara's point, of the relationship that we're trying to advance.
I think that's a good
as long as we focus on the relationships, we're okay.
Yeah. The thing I notice in the literature that we're reading, and I think communicators have a responsibility to address this, is nobody talks about the common values we have. Regardless of how old you are or where you are in a company, you still want to be, one, respected. You want to be challenged in your job so that it's engaging and interesting. You want some flexibility to push that envelope a little bit to show how smart you are. And we all want that.
I think that's a great point, Marianne, because I know that when I've done things across cultures, not just generational, but across country boundaries,
right.
When you get a group together, the first thing people tend to do is focus on the differences. It's like that, yes. We're not like you, you're like this, you'll never understand us as this. And if you let people vent and get that out of the way, what you find more often than not is that there's more that people have in common than they do in terms of the differences that separate. And I think we may be guilty of trying to dissect and find all the differences and focus on those.
Yeah. When I was the age of the millennials, I worked for the American Nurses Association, and I was probably just as mouthy as some of the young millennials are today and demanding what they want. I had nurses on a regular basis start to talk to me about something and say, oh, you couldn't possibly understand, you're not a nurse. Well, my reaction tended to be, instead of to cower in the corner, was to look them in the eye and say, try me, I'm literate, I'm a college graduate.
I love it.
That's not any different today with someone that same age. They're still going to react in that way when they get pushed.
I was going to pose another question to the group to sort of ponder. I mean, one of the things you hit upon, Mark, was, we were enamored of the latest cool toy. One of the challenges I think always has been for people who focus on employee internal communications is we barely have enough budget, we barely have enough resources to do much more than a one-size-fits-all approach. I mean, we've looked at it as a sort of homogeneous audience out there and sort of communicated, with a blast across and mass media kinds of tools, because that's all we barely had the money for, the budget for, the time to do. And now we're talking about generations, sort of subsections of workforces that might want to be communicated with in a different way, different messages. Certainly some of what Brenda talked about in terms of managerial communications is a way to go about doing this, but how do we address the one size doesn't fit all in t-shirts, and nor does it in communications? That was a stumper.
Yeah,
Everything I can see quickly that none of this is rehearsed.
I want to give a plug to some of our colleagues in some of their latest writings. This is certainly included in the framework that Shell has recently introduced. That is the whole idea of subscriptions and the whole idea of using technology to personalize the content that we receive because we're curious about different things. I like that idea. It's funny. We're all pendulums and we swing from point to point. And I think just because of the work I've been doing more recently, I think we need to start with what can we do face to face and what can we do person to person, and then ask ourselves how technology can help us make that happen. Can person to person be as meaningful when it's person to person over a screen as if I'm in the same room? And to make those conversations feel alive to people throughout the organization. I'm just of the instinct at this moment, focusing on those relationships, on those conversations will carry us farther than tailoring content. I don't think we're in a content moment. I think we're in a relationship moment.
Yes, I would say so. My current role is all about communication. And I say that vast, everything from first year med students to retired physicians. And my predecessor stopped communicating. We didn't have the technology to do the online stuff, and she'd stopped holding meetings. And it's interesting that our first and second, third year med students, they want face-to-face,
right,
in-person contact with practicing physicians because they want that relationship.
Yep.
But we also are looking at, and I think on the verge of actually getting the right kind of technology to be able to provide a format where physicians can talk to one another on HIPAA compliant technology so they can converse. Most of the physicians I work with communicate with me by text. They almost never call me. I get a lot of emails from the boss, but most of them are text messages during the day or a phone call at night because they're practicing during the daytime. I've only got one physician in all the vast group of committees and so on that I work with who drops into the office and gets quite unhappy when my assistant and I are neither one there. And it's been explained to him more than once that we do our jobs out in the community often, and that sitting at our desk in the office is not getting the job done. But he's very definitely that old school. He's pre-baby boomer.
Yeah.
And
you've hit upon a really key, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm done.
I think you've hit upon a really key distinction, and that is I have a hunger as an employee to understand what's in the head of the people who lead the organization. That requires as personal an experience as I can have. I also want to get things done, and I want there to be enough technology in the organization to enable me to use technology to get things done. The tools to share knowledge, the tools to share documents, all those things that make organizations more efficient. I think we have to realize the difference, that on one hand, we're talking about the use of technology to streamline. On the other hand, people want to see inside, and that may not always occur when it's done through a channel, or perhaps the ultimate communications challenge for us is how do you make the technology make me feel I'm having that personal contact?
Yeah. We still do a print newsletter, but we only print 40 copies and we only mail 14 of them. The rest of it is online. But we've got 14 people who want that, hold that in their hands.
That's right.
So we do.
And you're going to always have that component of your group that prefers to actually touch for communications physically. And again, with the work that I've done in AARP, whose membership are people age 50 and older. You have those who are very adept at doing business online, conference calls, video conferencing, but then you have others who are nervous about being online, period, even with email. And I'm not talking about someone that's 70 plus. You have people who are even in their 50s who don't trust online. You see all the hacking that's been going on, so they don't want to deal with it. They don't want to do online shopping because of privacy issues. And then some people have, like I said, have been in their jobs, and the only online thing that they've done is maybe submit their timesheet on their job. They don't want to be in front of a computer when they leave the office. So they're not going to dip their toe in that pond. So you need to be able to, to me, it's marketing 101, delivering the message in different ways, numerous occasions to get people engaged and involved. I know that when we did some things at AARP, especially when we were doing our work with the LGBTQ community and we were bringing in people from throughout the organization, the first meetings were held face-to-face, which worked very well. And you got people engaged from the beginning so that even if they missed a future meeting, they were able to dial in. We set it up. If you couldn't be there face-to-face, you can dial in. You just have to figure out those many ways to get people connected.
I think the bottom line, Brad, answering your question, is that for communicators, our job has become more complicated, but what it all comes back to is our basic human communication skills and applying them in a multiple of media to meet those different individuals at their level. And it's challenging. It is only becoming more and more challenging.
And it's fascinating, Tamara, the nature of those challenges. Most of my students, I would say, in business school are between ages 25 and 35, maybe a few up to age 40, but usually 25 to 35. One of the key things that I require them to do is to become comfortable to learn how to communicate through a camera. Because anyone in business today has to be able to be comfortable enough with a camera to reach through a camera to connect with someone else. It's about as fundamental as anything can be. I am amazed at how it throws them. The first week, I'm amazed at how I can't even get them to look into the camera. I say, you know, you're not looking into the camera if you're looking to the floor. It's an easy thing to check out. But it's amazing to me that, again, if you were going to, as Brad suggested, look at this, you know, we can't look at just the superficial descriptions of generations, because that would tell you that those 25 to 35s would just think looking through that camera and talking to me through that camera would be a completely natural experience, and it's not. And so what I love about the challenge of technology is how do we use it to make it feel like I am in the room with you when I'm not. That's what's fabulous about it, because people want you in the room.
Yeah, right.
And it is amazing what it is that technology can do. I mean, some of the immersive things that we're seeing coming out in terms of virtual reality are certainly along those lines. There have been some amazing things done. I've seen a demonstration of 3D holographic video conferencing, where you can actually project someone into a room and they have a three-dimensional quality to it. It's almost like from Star Wars, Princess Leia with, you know, help me Obi-Wan, you're my only hope kind of thing, only life-size with whom you can interact. So we have some technology that can help overcome some of those things, or, you know, bring people together over miles and perhaps over generations. I was going to ask a question of each of you, which is, you know, is your current boss or your last boss or something, you know, younger than you? How many of you report to someone who's younger? And do you remember that time when it was like you know, I'm no longer reporting to a person that's older than me, that knows more and has been around the industry. I'm now reporting to someone who's younger than me, who may not have the experience that I do.
Well, there are no people older than me living, so.
Yes. I would say, well, all the board officers, they're my bosses, they're my management team. They're all younger than I am. There are adults out in this world that I babysit for, infants that are older than some of these doctors that I'm working with right now. So I'm kind of like you, Mark. It's like, yeah, because I started another career.
Right, and in my last workplace scenario, my manager was younger than me, but I wouldn't say, you know, like 12 to 13 years younger. But this past summer, I was sitting in on my local commission on aging. panel discussions where I was basically the youngest person in the room.
Good for you.
So I've had, and that was quite interesting in terms of the acceptance of my knowledge and expertise in the room was much level, but was much at a higher level with those in the room who were older than I am than when I worked in a scenario where some of the people I worked with were a little bit younger than me or were a little bit younger than me. You know, they were still respectful, but still it was an interesting dynamic to be bounced between both of those scenarios.
Well, and let me give you my little 2 bits. I retired from leadership of my organization a year ago, and I trained my successor, who is easily 8 to 10 years younger than me. And it's a good feeling because we need new ideas, and so I was very happy for that. But at the same time, because I'm now the most senior member of my organization, I continue to get questions, and that's kind of nice too, that there's that respect for the knowledge that each of the members of the organization bring to the table. So I'm still getting used to it, but so far so good.
And I also find, Brad, that in addition to having a boss who is younger than me, who's from outside the United States, I also find that as a coach, most of the people that I coach are planted firmly in their mid-40s, or early to mid-40s. And I realize that, you know, I'm not in my early to mid-40s. And so I do have to, you know, our profession has always been one of reinvention. We have each reinvented ourselves so many times. It's one of the great things about being in this profession is that it demands it, but it also enables it. So I'm not surprised to hear that Mary Ann is on career number 410.
Yes.
Because the strengths that she developed early in her career enable her to reinvent. And that's what I find the moral of the working with people, reporting to people, partnering with people much younger than we are, what that's all about. It's not trying to all of a sudden act cool, because I wasn't cool when I was that age. It is a matter of making certain that I listen, making certain that I absorb, making certain that I connect. And those are the fundamentals of all communicators, no matter our age.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I have a question for you.
That was in Communication World by Jeannie Meister talks a little about mentoring and reverse mentoring and some of the programs that are in place where we can all learn from one another.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've got a question for you all, because I was thinking about as we're listening to the discussion. My network of friends these days ranges from people, and I mean close enough friends that I do dinners, lunches, that kind of stuff, not just acquaintances, ranges from people in their early 30s to people in their 80s. Do you have that kind of network?
I do. In fact, because of the work that I do with the chapel on the campus of Howard University, I have a network of young college students who I orient on the difference between social communications for business versus social communications with your friends. Because these are students who are responsible, who are on the public relations committee for the chapel. So when they want to promote what they're doing, it's going out to an audience, especially when they're using Instagram and Twitter in particular, it's going out to an audience that is beyond the campus.
Mm-hmm.
So we talk about that. We've talked about hashtags, and I have reinvented myself as a writer, editor / social communications person. Then, because of my network with AARP, and I am now a volunteer with AARP, I have an older crowd. And, you know, it's a matter of doing more face-to-face types of communication with them. And then I'm working with someone who is promoting what boomers like to do, and those are gig jobs. I'm thinking, if you all haven't heard of that term, I'm happy to explain that later. But how do you promote gig jobs to people who are between the ages of 55 and 65? And so I'm of communicating to that audience as well. So I've got a range.
And I found that over the years that I'm more building networks that are based upon topics than it is about, you know, sort of people that I would normally associate with because they're the same age, psychographic, demographic kind of profile. So, you know, if you're passionate about a topic, if you want to learn about something, you befriend somebody who's younger, somebody who's older, somebody who can, you know, sort of have that simpatico, and you can learn from and share with. And so I find that tends to overcome generational and age differences. I would hope that that same kind of pattern exists in workplaces as well. That if you are passionate about a topic, if you have a common set of goals, if you can relate, if you are engaged, as we put the term today, that you will find ways to sort of bring this team together. And sometimes it requires little extra things, programs sort of put in place around it that have been called out in some of the articles in communication world. So what we are talking about is the challenges for communications people working in a multi-generational workplace setting. This is the IABC Circle of Friends number 25 episode. And if you do have a question for the group, you can send it in Twitter, the hashtag being hashtag COF, Circle of Friends 25, COF25. We'd be glad to answer your question. Also let you know that this broadcast, as all the Circle of Friends, do get posted in an archive, so you have a chance to share it with others and come back and visit. So how do we shift mindsets to deal with multi-generational teams in the workplace? Is there a way to get people to embrace that range that Marianne has in the personal life?
I actually think, go ahead, Marianne.
I think we have to do some of the kind of, well, I'll call it manipulation for an easy word, as communicators that we perhaps have embraced naturally in our personal lives. We need to look at ways as communicators of getting those diverse age groups and cultural groups together. Yeah. For a reason that's low risk. So they're not always on a work team to accomplish a project, but how do we get them engaged in topics that they are interested in? Brad, like you were talking about, you seek out people that have similar interests, not necessarily similar in age. We need to figure out how to do that in the workplace so that we've got some of those relationships budding on a more social level, so when they are in the room to accomplish something, they can work together.
Yeah. I think that's really good. I think that, again, it calls upon different skills than perhaps were once paramount in our careers. I think the skill to facilitate those conversations is absolutely essential. And as you were talking, the building of those networks, that making it sticky, and being relevant. One of the realities of the difference in generations is a definition of relevance and the steps I take when something is no longer relevant. Mm-hmm. And one truth is that younger workers tend to be of a more disposable nature, because if this phone doesn't work, I simply throw it away and I get a new one. Or if this company doesn't work, I simply throw it away and get a new one. Or if this relationship doesn't work. We have to have our ears sharper and our minds sharper and our hearts sharper to be able to find the clues and be able to intervene when we can sense that people are jumping off or starting to depart or find us at less than relevant. And I think we do that by what we facilitate, not simply what messages we send. I think we're beyond the sending messages point in our work.
Yeah.
One of the themes that I'm hearing in this bit of a conversation is the organic nature of these relationships between generations, as opposed to forcing a program onto a company and saying you will, you will mentor or you will have a relationship with these people. But having an organic development, like around common interests or values or goals, even volunteerism in an organization, how we activate employees to be volunteers and brand ambassadors is a more organic way than forcing them to go to some sort of generational training. I think that's especially true with younger cohorts because they see that. They see
Right.
artificial as opposed to a genuine relationship that they're going to keep up as they, mature with the organization.
And I think to Mark's point, we do live in an era where oftentimes people feel, oh, I can get something from the internet and get my answer and be done with it and then move on to something else. It's not as if you need to follow someone who's an author that you admire over years and years and years of their writing. You sort of dip in and dip out, and it's not quite the same. It's very interesting in Angie Lindsay's piece that appears in Communication World. One of the things she talks about is sort of making the conversation a little bit more overt. She talks about an ice-breaking skill that if you ever have to put on some sort of a workshop, you get two people from different generations and that interview each other and then share what you learned kind of thing. But one is, describe a skill that you know that you're good at that others may not know that you're good at. One assumption you have about the other person's generation, and then one work skill or experience you'd like to learn from another person, and then you share those. So I think sometimes bringing the conversation out about generational differences can be sort of that admission that we are different, but we're the same. It's the beginning of that conversation.
Right. And I also find that engaging individuals of all ages in conversations about community service or volunteerism is an interesting way of closing the gap. And I think I've fell on that because most of my career has been spent in nonprofits and associations, and for a lot of young people, school systems, especially here in the United States, are requiring before you graduate from high school that you do some sort of volunteer work and community service, and it's being required on college applications. And colleges are putting together day of service kinds of things. So people are volunteering of all ages. And if you are able to do an icebreaker, which I have done, that talks about, do you volunteer? And some people may think they don't volunteer, but they really are. And you kind of put some descriptors around what volunteering looks like and talk about it, but talk about how those individuals feel about giving back. You will find a connection, feeling, that altruistic approach, to living one's life on a day-to-day basis that will connect generations of, people of all ages more quickly than you would ever imagine.
I have to, a challenge to all of you guys, come up with a good label. We've gone through Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z. What's the next one after Z? Do we start at the front end of the alphabet, or is there one?
Oh, it's going to be just like hurricanes. We can't use the same letter twice. Part of me, and I love this conversation. First of all, I love the fact that scratch paper still works for taking notes, and I'm ready, Professor Gillis, for the exam after we're done. I want it to be Generation Us, and generation that is all about connecting and that anyone can join. I don't want it to be by letter that I can't join because I'm too old or I'm too young. I want it to be a generation where we want to be a part of it because of those things we hold in common. And we've been talking primarily today about the difference in generations by age. There are other boundaries that separate people. And I work in a school that is made up, 55% of people who are not from the United States. I have students in my classroom most times from 7 to 10 countries. Those divides are actually more real to me than the generational divides in many of those cases because of the difference in expectations that people bring into conversation. So, as communicators, we've always been the glue of organizations. Maybe we need to take that glue and spread it around a little bit more than simply within a company I might work for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know how to top that, Mark. I really don't. I want to be part of your Generation Us.
Generation Us, I'm for that.
I think we've hit upon a number of different schemes, because I think the good part is we've talked about technology and its impact on both creating some of the generation gaps, but also being able to overcome it. We've also talked a lot about the human side of this thing, because it is about relationships and it is about people. And it's an issue, a circumstance that has been around from the very beginning, when you've had, the senior person and an apprentice, more formal relationships in the past, but always learning from someone. And now what we're saying is we need to maybe even be more explicit about some of these models that are out there, and how we can all learn from one another and be supportive, because whether it's reverse mentoring or a new skill set that certain people and certain generations bring in, we perhaps have to recognize that it isn't necessarily all based upon seniority and age. At the same time, while I say that, I love looking at places like some of the Asian cultures where there is tremendous respect for seniority and knowledge. And for those of you who are in universities where sometimes the teacher doesn't get the respect that he or she deserves, you sometimes covet what goes on in an Asian culture, where there is much more respect paid to people who are wiser and older and teach.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good point, Brad. I think that's part of what creates the gap in the generations is, as a culture in the United States, we're not very respectful of older people. The idea that you're over the hill if you're 40, or you're, at the time you're 70, you ought to be retired and playing bingo at noon and going to bed at 4, whatever. I think we have to work as communicators to dispel those myths. So when we have within our respective environments those people who are older and wiser, but are also maybe tech savvy, and to show that it's not about how old you are, it's how you behave.
Right.
Yeah. We've all had conversations, whether with headhunters, whether with colleagues, whether with friends, about the challenges of finding a job when you are at a certain age or beyond a certain age. I think we do have to look at ourselves and our profession and how we perpetuate this notion that you have to be of a certain age in order to be with it, a certain to be relevant. And I think we are as guilty as those who observe us. I think too many times we look at the programming at conferences, we look at the articles in publications, and they're all about what's new, and they're about those shiny objects. And they do send a message that if you can't do this, then maybe there isn't something you can contribute. I think we have to look beyond that, because what I've taken in all my notes today from you all, and I love these conversations, I don't know if I have technology written down here once. I have the fundamentals of relationships and listening and facilitating and connecting. That's what our profession is about. Technology is a means to an end. It is a way to reach the outcome, but it's not what the outcome is.
Yes.
And I try to help younger Gen Xers and some of the Gen Ys understand and think about respecting older folks and those who have a vast amount of knowledge. When I lay on them information that I acquired through my career at the U.S. Department of Labor, indicates that signs of age discrimination begin at age 40. That shuts it all down. And it's documented in terms of, and I tell them what it will look like. Discrimination will look like in the workplace. You're denied training. You're left out of meetings. All these little things. And when I'm saying this to a group of people who are in their 40s, they're looking at me, their eyes just bug out, So that just shuts it all down and allows them to begin thinking about where they are in their lives, who is in their life, their parents, their grandparents, sometimes great-grandparents, and in terms of how they interact, and maybe what those individuals who are older than them have gone through that they themselves do not want to be subjected to. So you kind of have to put things, put it down in a way that this is happening to you right now and you don't even know it. So you need to be on the lookout for it.
Well said.
Brenda, you should be short and over 40.
Oh no.
Yeah. You get ignored at the deli counter. You're ignored at the any place that has any kind of a barrier like that would be less than chest high on the rest of you in this conversation is like neck high on me. And and since I turned 40, it's even worse. And men and women both do it to me. And
yeah,
we have to look at those kinds of things.
You need to walk into businesses with a 20 showing, I got money here. I'm ready to do business.
Well, I once went into a car dealership where Gary worked, wearing a fur coat, carrying a leather briefcase, and I got ignored.
Wow, I'm surprised they didn't run right after you.
Yeah, they should have. It was a cold January night in Minnesota. There wasn't anybody looking to buy a car but me. Yeah, and I was ignored. I bought the car anyway, and then I hated it, but that's another story for another session.
But all kidding aside, I think that we can, and I think forums like this are great examples. We can facilitate conversations to help people see that there is value in time, there is value in seasoning, there is value in experience. Because when I look at the people on this discussion today, and I think of the years I have learned from each of you, then who wouldn't be enriched by that? But people will only be touched by that if we make it available. I was on this bizarre conversation with a search consultant. They don't like the term headhunter, who told me before asking my age, and of course she could figure out how old I was because, I'm Googleable. But she says, "You have a very old voice." And I said, before 10, it sounds old. By 2, it sounds really young. And I'm just a teenager by 6 at night. And so I think sometimes we also have to bring a sense of humor to those things that can separate us and remind each other and remind ourselves that we're only as valuable as how we see ourselves in the mirror. And you know what? We see a lot of richness that a lot of people can continue to learn from, no matter the technology.
Right.
And I think the other piece is that we just need to be able to find ways to share with others some of that knowledge without making it become a lesson or a put down of some sort of we tried that or been there, done that kind of things. But I think the other piece that I've noticed, for example, in technology is how things tend to move in waves and repeat themselves. And if you've hung around long enough, you can sort of see a pattern emerging if you don't have that perspective. So, it's like being able to go to someone and saying, we have experienced things very much like this. And maybe, you could do a little bit more, work with us and studying this and see if it's applicable to this particular instance. Because, maybe we're the ones, we don't have to necessarily say, we did that and you need to follow that pattern. Instead, we need to find ways to encourage people to learn from the past.
Yeah, I often, when I'm teaching someone to do something they've never done, like the media relations piece, I will say, here's the steps I want you to do the first time. This is, to get started. Don't wing it. This is what works. Then after you've done it, come back and tell me how you would adapt that to make it more comfortable for you.
Mm-hmm.
So you give them you give them a pattern, and then after they kind of can embrace that pattern, then they can work from that. They can adapt it and extrapolate. But if they're starting from scratch, I think it sets them up for failure to say, oh, here, just go call this reporter.
Yeah, and in today's fast-paced world, sometimes that's about as much direction as people get.
Yes.
That's right.
Quick
And
order
that's wrong.
and an expexptation that, oh, I can watch the YouTube to be able to tackle this instead of, you know, I can learn everything that I need to in, you know, a 30-second video.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think 80% of what's on YouTube is incorrect anyway. Just ask the people you run into that have bad hair days. More than likely, they learned how to do that hairstyle on YouTube.
I think
So.
I had one of those today.
So you really need to go back to what Marianne has said, you know, give your colleagues the basics and then get feedback from them. Now tell me how you might go about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've done that with an intern I'm working with right now, and it's really exciting to watch her bloom out of that.
You know, as I share with my students every day, we work in the simplest of professions that we manage to complicate better than any people who walk the earth. And I think sometimes these discussions tend to veer toward how we complicate rather than how we simplify. Our profession is all about people connecting.
Mm-hmm.
What's wonderful about technology is I feel I'm in the room with all of you today. That's how technology enhances relationships and enhances collaboration. That's how we should look at technology, is how does it enhance the connection that people can make, not how does it substitute for that connection.
Yeah. But Mark, don't you feel like we have that connection because we've also had some face-to-face,
Yes.
Yeah.
real life in the past?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've made that connection. Now it's comfortable and easy to connect through technology.
Yeah. But I do think that when we learn how to master the technology, we can reach through that technology to touch each other, just like the commercial told us 2 years ago.
The key word that keeps coming up is the word learn, right? It doesn't happen without some trial and error and sometimes some failures that we learn from, and we move on and create better systems and patterns in our organizations.
And there are a lot of free resources to capture that learning that I like to convey to folks, especially when it comes to using digital technology, your phone, your iPad, your laptop. Go to whoever is supplying you with your cellular service. AARP.org has some resources. Yes, there are some YouTube videos for the technology that you might want to tap, but also look at your community colleges and try to tap some learning resources there.
I think those are all great pieces of advice. And in some ways, this discussion of getting the workforce together to be able to accomplish goals is a perfect segue to what we hope will be the next Circle of Friends that you'll listen to. Coming up in the month of October, we have a panel that will talk about managing fast-paced transformational change. And you need the entire sets of generations to be able to help accomplish that. The panelists next month, joining Shell Holtz, will be back in the moderator seat, will be Priya Bates, Jim Luchaszewski, Annette Martel, and Jim Schaefer. So we want to thank you guys for coming and joining us and spending some time learning a little bit about the multi-generational communication challenges that we face in the workplace today. I want to thank Brenda Siler and Mark Schumann, Tamara Gillis, and Ann McCauley for being able to spend some of their precious time and sharing some of their best ideas with us in the Circle of Friends. We want to thank IABC for welcoming us into the Circle of Friends and being able to help share this with IABC members and leverage the word and these good thoughts a little bit more broadly. And we encourage you to send us ideas for topics that you'd love to see us cover in the future. So with that, thank you very much for joining us. I'm Brad Whitworth, and we will see you again next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.